Hey guys, tonight we drift into the floating gardens of the Aztecs, where the cornstalks shimmer like ghosts in the moonlight and frogs argue over whose lily pad is better. You're not just strolling through history, you're floating through it. Literally. Because these gardens sit on rafts of mud and woven reeds. The night air is thick with the smell of damp earth and crushed marigold petals. Somewhere, a flute plays a melody that sounds suspiciously like a lullaby for vegetables. Welcome to the place where plants don't just grow, they listen. You trudge along the narrow causeways between garden plots called chinampas, balancing with the grace of someone who skipped leg day. Beneath your feet, the water glugs quietly, echoing against the edges of the plots like a giant slurping his soup. Each garden row is neat, unnervingly so. You get the creeping feeling that someone's watching. Not a person, not an animal, no, something botanical, a corn stalk, maybe, staring you down like it knows you microwaved a tortilla once. The moon above Tenochtitlan casts its silver net over the sprawling lake. The city, nestled in the valley like an island jewel, pulses with soft torchlight. But here in the chinampas, well, here the world breathes differently. You hear the sigh of a canoe passing by. You hear the croak of frogs doing their best barbershop quartet. You hear the unmistakable hush of a society that believes deeply in the night's gentle power. These gardens aren't your grandma's backyard kale patch. They're floating fields tethered with stakes to keep them from drifting. Built from layers of lakebed mud and woven vegetation. They're basically compost rafts. Somehow, they don't stink. In fact, they're weirdly beautiful. Morning glories curl over the edges. And you spot a heron watching you like it's judging your outfit. What's truly odd is how quietly alive everything feels. As if the plants here are not just passively growing, but participating. The Aztecs didn't think of plants as mute little background characters. No, the maize has personality, possibly gossip. It's why they sang to it. But more on that in a bit. You reach one particular chinampa where someone's laid out offerings, a few flowers, some painted stones, and, strangely, half a tamale. It's an altar, a mini one, sitting beside a stalk of young corn. You consider whether the corn is supposed to eat the tamale, which feels a bit like cannibalism. But hey, you're just a visitor here. The night's coolness clings to your skin. Somewhere in the distance, drums thump low and slow. Not war drums, sleepy drums, maybe corn-friendly drums. You don't know yet. You pass under an arch made of bent saplings and obsidian beads. On the other side, a man tends his corn with all the tenderness of someone brushing their cat's hair while whispering compliments. He looks up. He's got face paint on, swirls of green and gold that glint in the low light. His tunic is dyed with cochineal red and fringed with what looks like tiny feathers. He nods solemnly, then returns to his task, singing very quietly to a squash vine. You pause. You watch. You wonder if squash vines have taste in music. He's singing in Nahuatl, the Aztec tongue, and though you don't understand the words, the tone is unmistakably cozy. Like a lullaby. Like the kind you hum to a baby or a particularly needy plant. Do you always sing to them? You ask. Because it seems polite. He nods. They grow better when they're happy. And just like that, your whole concept of gardening dies a little. You remember your last basil plant, withered, cranky, definitely never serenaded, and feel a pang of guilt. Maybe you should have whispered more sweet nothings between waterings. As you wander further into the gardens, the smell of damp maize and fresh mud surrounds you. A bat flits past your ear. Somewhere, someone sneezes loudly. It's unclear if it's a person or a particularly expressive frog. The chinampas stretch into the distance. Hundreds of green fingers poking from the lake's dark surface. You realize now that this wasn't just clever agriculture, it was sacred landscape. Everything here is laid out with intention. The direction of planting, the placement of paths, even the time of harvest. It's all tied to ritual calendars and celestial rhythms. You, meanwhile, are still trying to figure out if it's okay to step on the moss-covered stones without offending a local spirit. One thing becomes very clear, in Aztec worldview. Nature isn't a dumb backdrop. It's a character in the play. The corn has moods. The soil has stories. The wind might be gossiping about you. And yes, that's an actual historical mindset. Not just your sleep-deprived brain. Scholars still argue whether these song rituals had measurable effects on crop yield. Was it psychological? Spiritual placebo? Acoustic photosynthesis? No one agrees. But the farmers believed it deeply. And that belief shaped everything from planting techniques to lunar schedules. Oh, and you notice this strange, persistent detail. None of the farmers are talking loudly. Everything is half-whispered, even the laughter. It's like the gardens enforce a kind of reverence. Like a cathedral built from reeds and moonlight. You stop at the edge of a chinampa to look at your reflection in the black water. But instead, you see corn leaves waving slowly behind you. Even though there's no breeze. Probably nothing. Probably. The frogs croak louder. You feel sleep creeping up from your toes to your eyes. Carried on the perfume of lake flowers and damp cedar. Somewhere behind you, the man starts singing again. Something about the moon and the harvest and maybe, just maybe, a recipe for tamales. And as you drift onward through this midnight maze, you start to suspect the plants have already judged you. And forgiven you. As long as you hum back. You keep walking. Though, walking might be a generous term. It's more of a wobbly trudge through ankle-high mist while trying not to fall into a canal. The path narrows again. Nothing more than 2 logs laid side by side over the water. Slick with moss and something suspiciously fishy. You wobble like a toddler learning balance and mutter something that rhymes with bad decisions. Still, you press on, because tonight's mystery isn't just about plants. It's about why Aztec gardeners sang to them. And what, exactly, those plants might have been hearing. You pause beside a patch of corn, maize. Technically, but you're not here to split etymological hairs. The stalks are taller than you. Swaying gently like they're dancing to a rhythm only they can hear. Which, frankly, is unsettling, and possibly rude, since they didn't invite you to join. The idea that corn listens isn't some stoned farmer's daydream. It was common knowledge in the Aztec world. They believed maize had ears, not metaphorical ones, but sensitive, reactive, spiritual receptors. If you whisper blessings, it grows straight and golden. If you scold it, it pouts, possibly grows sideways, maybe shrinks. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic, spiritual, or a sneaky way to make kids be nicer to their food. You lean in toward one particular stalk, just for fun. Hey, you whisper, you're doing great. It does nothing, but you feel like it appreciated it. You really do. In Aztec mythology, corn wasn't just food. It was a god's gift, a god's body, and also kind of a roommate. There are whole origin stories where humans are literally made of corn. Flesh of the gods? Try kernels of the cosmos. And you're walking among them. Better be polite. The singing? Oh, that was serious business. Not just hums and ditties. Structured, ceremonial chants, some written in codices. Others passed down like bedtime stories that happened to involve drought prevention and possibly human sacrifice. But we'll keep things PG for now. The songs served multiple purposes. They honored deities, especially Sentiatl, the maize god. They timed farming activities to celestial calendars. They created a vibe, think ancient lo-fi, but with more feathered headdresses. And yes, they may have helped synchronize group work. A bunch of people planting while chanting in rhythm? Suddenly farming looks more like a rave with shovels. You continue walking and spot a small boy, no older than 8, gently swaying back and forth in front of a baby cornstalk. He's singing something repetitive, rhythmic, soothing. His voice is soft, yet steady, like he's known this song forever. No one told him to do it. He just knows it matters. Nearby, an older woman gathers herbs while murmuring lines under her breath. You don't know the words, but it sounds like both a prayer and a poem. The melody falls in and out of tune, like she's more concerned with emotion than perfection. And somehow, it fits. You pass them both and realize, there's no central choir. No conductor. The entire chinampa is a patchwork of voices. Scattered and sincere. Everyone sings, alone but together, and always to the plants, never to each other. Now, whether corn actually responds to music, that's another story. Some modern botanists say yes, certain sound frequencies might stimulate growth hormones or stress responses. Others roll their eyes and mutter things about pseudoscience. But the Aztecs didn't need lab equipment. They had generations of farmers who believed it worked. And belief, especially when sung every day, becomes its own kind of truth. You run your fingers along a stalk. The leaves are rough-edged and wet with dew. A small bird chirps from somewhere inside the greenery. It could be a warbler. Or a possessed pigeon. You try not to think about it. As you wander farther, the mist thickens, turning the chinampas into floating islands in a sea of gray. Lights flicker in the distance, torches maybe. Or fireflies doing some kind of coordinated dance. You begin to lose track of time, of space, of whether you're dreaming or actually here. At one point, you're certain the corn sways in time with the nearest chant. Not the wind, the song, which either proves plant sentience or that you need a nap. Possibly both. The eerie part? It doesn't feel silly. It feels right. You're not here to judge. You're here to listen, and maybe hum along. You hear a low whistle. And it takes a moment to realize it's coming from someone behind you. An old man, hunched and wrapped in a faded cloak, sits cross-legged beside a sunflower stalk. He gestures you over. His fingers are gnarled like roots, and his voice rasps like dry corn husk. She likes the high notes, he says, nodding at the flower, and only when it's cloudy. You laugh nervously. He does not. Don't insult her with a tune meant for beans. You promise not to, though you're not entirely sure what key beans prefer. Still, you make a mental note. Beans equals lower register. Apparently. He turns back to the sunflower and begins humming again, delicate, reedy notes that seem to hover in the air longer than they should. You step away slowly, not wanting to disturb the performance. By now, it's clear. These songs aren't entertainment. They're communication. Between humans and gods. Between people and plants. Maybe even plant to plant. Like a leaf-to-leaf gossip session you're not invited to. Rude, but understandable. You reach another garden bed. This one is full of amaranth, tiny, vivid plants with edible leaves and the kind of reputation that says, "I'm nutritious but will stain your tunic forever." The grower here is silent. Instead of singing, he taps two stones together rhythmically. A percussion ritual. Because apparently plants also enjoy beats. You don't know if the corn is actually listening, but you know they believe it is. And honestly, that's enough. You pause once more before crossing a narrow wooden bridge. The water reflects the stars. The corn rustles gently, like it's saying good night. You wonder what your houseplants would say if you sang to them. Probably, finally. You keep walking. The songs trail behind you like soft smoke. And the corn? It stands tall, proud, golden in the moonlight, humming its own secret tune. You blink and realize you've wandered into another section of the garden, this one noticeably more vibrant. Not just in color, but in energy. It's louder here, but not in the usual city way. This is a garden with flair. You hear chimes, flutes, a maraca, maybe, and then you spot him. An Aztec gardener wearing what can only be described as the bird costume from your dreams and nightmares. His headdress bristles with parrot feathers in a chaos of red, green, and blue. His tunic sparkles faintly with tiny beads. And around his ankles, bells jingle with every step. You stare. He poses. You're unsure whether to say, "Nice outfit," or apologize for dressing like a laundry basket. But he's not here for fashion. He's here for farming. He dances between rows of young maize, singing in sharp, rising phrases that cut through the humid air like a stone knife through ripe avocado. Every so often, he stops to adjust a leaf, pat the soil, or twirl dramatically like he's auditioning for, so you think you can plant. You take a hesitant step closer. He pauses and regards you with the calm patience of someone used to explaining complex ideas to people wearing sneakers. You must be careful with the rhythm, he says. Maize does not respond to boredom. You almost mutter, same. But he's already swirling away again. Bells jingling, feathered arms outstretched. Here's the thing. Farming was sacred. Aztec agriculture didn't separate work from ritual. There was no, "I'll plant the seeds, then pray later." No. It all happened at once. Gardening was prayer. Harvesting was a ceremony. Even pulling weeds had a chant. You try not to think about how your modern lawnmower screams obscenities at the grass. Historians have pieced together the elaborate rituals from codices, folded books with bright illustrations, and colonial-era accounts. Some of which sound more like confused Yelp reviews from conquistadors trying to understand why everyone was singing to a turnip. In particular, the singing gardener was often also a performer priest. These weren't mere dirt-stained peasants. They were specialists, educated, sometimes chosen by birth or omen. And they didn't just know which moon phase to plant in. They knew the mythological backstory of the god who invented the moon. You try to imagine your local grocery store cashier quoting crop astrology mid-sale. Honestly, it sounds more helpful than paper or plastic. The gardener twirls again, this time landing in a crouch beside a pepper plant. He begins chanting directly to it, something rhythmic and percussive, snapping his fingers and tapping a small drum. The pepper plant seems unbothered. You, however, feel underdressed. He looks up and gestures toward the sky. The gods give, he says, but they want to be noticed. That was the core of it. The gods didn't just toss blessings like candy from a parade float. You had to show gratitude, attention, effort. You had to wear your best feathers and dance your best steps. And most importantly, you had to sing. You glance around and realize many of the gardeners in this area are dressed similarly. Not as flamboyantly, some wear simple tunics embroidered with maize motifs, or cloaks dyed with crushed insects and flower petals, but all of them carry the same energy. Reverence mixed with rhythm, like every cornstalk is a sacred guest. And this is one very long party where everyone's on their best behavior. You pass a woman humming into a gourd like it's a microphone. She adjusts her necklace, which features what you hope is a carved pumpkin seed and not something more organic. She nods to you and returns to her melody. A little farther, you see someone using a conch shell as an instrument. The sound is eerie and echoing, like a whale calling from the lake bed. It's not exactly melodic, but it feels important. Even the frogs pause their gossip for a moment. The Aztecs didn't distinguish sharply between music, prayer, and command. Singing was how you got the attention of divine beings, and also how you encouraged corn to behave. If your plants weren't growing, maybe your vocals were flat. Maybe you needed more feathers. And feathers, by the way, were everywhere, not just decorative. They were seen as carriers of divine energy. A single blue quetzal feather was considered more valuable than gold. Wearing one meant you were bringing the sky with you, or at least borrowing it. So naturally, the bird-costumed farmer wasn't just being extra, he was communicating with the heavens. Scholars still debate whether these musical traditions originated purely within Mesoamerica or if they evolved from older, shared practices across early civilizations. Some argue they reflect an intuitive understanding of sound vibrations in soil. Others roll their eyes and say, it's cultural. Stop trying to make it science. The truth? Still fluttering somewhere in the cornfields. You watch as two gardeners perform what looks like a slow-motion dance battle around a bean trellis. They alternate lines of song, moving in a circular rhythm. Then both kneel, press their palms to the earth, and whisper. You wonder what happens if you whisper the wrong thing. Does the zucchini ghost you? The ceremony ends abruptly, as if the plants themselves gave a silent nod of approval. One man stands and wipes his hands on his cloak. It is ready, he says to no one in particular. You are not ready, but you keep following, drawn by the music, the motion, and the low, resonant power of this garden is stage. The air here feels different, charged, somehow, like static before a storm, or the awkward pause before someone starts singing happy birthday in the wrong key. And beneath your feet, the garden listens. You've finally stopped gawking at the gardeners who dress like tropical birds and sing better than most wedding bands. Now you're trying to understand why. Why all this ceremony? This theater? This oddly soothing corn-centric opera? You take a deep breath. The night air tastes like warm mud, flower sap, and something suspiciously like roasted chili. Maybe your brain's inventing smells. Or maybe someone's prepping midnight tacos for the gods. Here's the truth that gently tickles your brain as you walk beneath arching stalks. Your broccoli doesn't need a lullaby. But Aztec corn? That stuff demanded attention. Because for the Aztecs, agriculture wasn't just a task, it was a full body, full belief experience. Science and religion weren't separate rooms. They were the same hammock, swaying together under the stars. You bend to examine a young bean plant. Nothing special, just some sprouting green reaching up like a kid asking to be picked up. But here, it's sacred. The bean was part of the agricultural trinity: corn, beans, squash, the Mesoamerican three musketeers. Together, they kept soil healthy, bellies full, and rituals on schedule. Try planting a garden today and getting that kind of loyalty. Your succulents don't chant your name at night. Next to you, an elderly woman taps a clay rattle as she waters a bed of herbs. The sound is rhythmic, like rain falling on a tiled roof. She's muttering. You catch one word, Tla zokamati. Thank you. To whom? The water? The plant? The god hiding in the basil bush? Honestly, probably all three. Aztec cosmology didn't have a concept of inanimate nature. Everything had tonali, a kind of sacred force. Or heat of life. Trees had it. Rocks had it. Your breakfast tamale had it. You definitely had it. Most days. You've probably heard of photosynthesis. Plants take in light, convert it into food, and grow. But the Aztecs had a different model. Plants grew when you respected them. When you honored the cycle of rain and fire and moonlight. When you offered words, and sometimes blood. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There were entire festivals dedicated to crops. Not harvest parties with awkward dancing and lukewarm cider. We're talking elaborate ceremonies with song, costume, offerings, and sometimes a side order of symbolic sacrifice, animal, flower, or, yes, occasionally human. The goal? Harmony with the gods, especially the ones responsible for food. See, to the Aztecs, farming wasn't just planting seeds. It was participating in the cosmic balance. The sun rises, the rain falls, the corn grows. You don't thank the sun? Maybe it decides to take a personal day. You don't praise the maize? It might grow bitter, emotionally and literally. You pass a cluster of small altars, each nestled between rows of chili peppers and amaranth. On them lie marigolds, cacao beans, and shaped candles that seem too detailed for anyone to have made without divine assistance or obsessive-compulsive tendencies. The flickering flames cast jittery shadows that make the corn look like it's waving at you. Politely, or warning you, could go either way. You kneel beside one of the altars and run your fingers across a smooth jade bead nestled beside an ear of corn. You're not sure if it's an offering or a misplaced bracelet. Doesn't matter. Here, everything is connected. One gardener, a middle-aged man with cheeks painted red and black, sings while balancing on one foot. You're impressed until he shifts effortlessly into a squat, still holding the note, still scattering ash over the soil. That's dedication. You try it. Your knees betray you instantly. You sit there on the dirt, wheezing, trying not to cry in front of a particularly judgy squash vine. The man doesn't laugh. He just smiles, presses a hand to his heart, and nods. Respect. In modern science, we like clean categories. Botany over here, religion over there. But the Aztecs lived in a beautiful, complicated blur. Their medicine was spiritual, their architecture astronomical, their farming? Entirely synchronized with ritual calendars, moon cycles, and sacred mathematics. One of those calendars, the Tonalpahuali, was a 260-day cycle used to guide rituals and farming. Specific days were favorable for planting, others for harvest, and some unlucky for anything beyond apologizing to the corn. Historians still argue how the calendar was used in day-to-day chinampa maintenance. But its influence is undeniable. These weren't random chants, they were scheduled, deliberate, a garden planner with cosmic clout. You walk on, this time passing a row of cacao trees. Their glossy leaves shimmer under the moonlight. The pods look like tiny footballs. Delicious, sacred footballs. A woman nearby is humming while grinding something on a flat stone. You smell roasted seeds, chocolate in its earliest, most bitter, most reverent form. You ask, softly, does it really work? The singing? She shrugs. The gods listen, so the plants do too. You consider how many houseplants you've lost over the years. Maybe it wasn't light or water. Maybe it was attitude. Maybe you were just being emotionally distant. Classic you. The moon climbs higher. The stars seem brighter here. Like they know something you don't. The gardens quiet slightly, not silent. Just drowsier. The songs slow down. The drums soften. Even the frogs seem to croak at half speed. You find a rock and sit. The damp soaks into your pants. But you don't care. You close your eyes and listen. Not just to the music, but to the space between the notes. The hush, the reverence, the feeling that everything around you is alive, and maybe a little nosy. This isn't farming the way you know it. This is farming as offering. As connection. As performance art for an audience of divine forces and plants with excellent memory. No one hands you a microphone. No one tells you to sing. But part of you wants to. Just a hum. Nothing complicated. A tune you make up on the spot. And as you do, the corn doesn't move. The wind doesn't stir. But something in the air settles. Approves. Accepts your melody. You hum a little louder. You hum your made-up lullaby until your voice runs out of bravery. Then you open one eye. Cautiously. The corn hasn't exploded, wilted, or filed a complaint with the plant union. You consider that a win. But something's changed. There's a tension in the air now. Not hostile, just attentive, like the moment before a curtain rises or a teacher calls your name after asking a really awkward question. You look up and freeze. Something is moving in the squash patch. Not the breeze. Not a raccoon. Definitely not one of those chirpy frogs pretending to be innocent. No, this movement is purposeful, steady, large. Two glowing shapes glide between the rows, half shadow, half dream. You squint. They shimmer gold in the torchlight. And then, like someone flipped a switch in your brain, you know, these aren't gardeners. They're gods. Or maybe just really committed actors in a moonlit pageant. Either way, they have presence. One wears a headdress taller than your whole torso. All maize husks and obsidian beads. The other seems to shimmer in and out of focus. Like your eyes can't decide if they're looking at a person or an idea. You don't move. You barely breathe. Even the frogs go silent. It clicks. This is Sentiatl territory now, the maize deity. Youthful, glowing, and mildly terrifying in the way only corn spirits can be. You'd expected him to look cornier. But he's radiant, regal, somewhere between a teenage prince and a sentient golden retriever made of plants. He stops beside a row of perfect corn stalks and places one hand gently on a leaf. No words, no song, just silence. The plant seems to lean into him, like a sleepy child recognizing its lullaby. The shimmering companion, maybe Chikomikawatl, maize goddess and possible partner in cosmic farming crime, circles you. Not threatening, just curious. Her robe is embroidered with seed patterns and swirling rivers. She smells like smoke, salt, and rain on dirt. You do your best not to say, hi, in the least dignified squeak possible. Now, this might be symbolic, might be dream logic, might be that squash leaf you chewed earlier had something psychedelic on it. But here's the deeper truth. Aztecs didn't just believe gods visited. They expected it. The entire purpose of singing, dressing up, offering food and flowers and maybe the occasional chicken, or worse, was to invite the divine. Not out of fear, though. Let's be honest. The gods had tempers, but out of relationship. It was how you stayed in good standing. How you kept the world spinning and the corn from going emo. You notice the gods aren't walking on the ground. Their feet hover just slightly above the soil. A good 2 fingers height. Enough to say, we're here. But also not here. It's strangely comforting. Like you're not going crazy. Just temporarily sharing headspace with eternity. Historically speaking, the gods of agriculture weren't always benevolent. They were powerful, yes, but also demanding. They wanted music, sacrifice, festivals. Entire months were named for them. And if those rituals went wrong? If someone sang off key or didn't offer enough roasted cacao beans, you might get drought, or flood, or a mysterious fungus that made your crops hallucinate themselves into oblivion. Historians still debate the nature of Aztec belief. Was it fear-based, transactional, deeply emotional? Some say they revered nature with a kind of ecological wisdom modern societies lost. Others point to rigid hierarchies and say it was more about power than prayer. But as you sit frozen beneath the gaze of glowing corn deities, one thing is certain, this wasn't performance. It was participation. Sentiatl turns his eyes toward you. They don't glow, exactly, but they seem to reflect every torch, moonbeam, and starlight flicker in the valley. You feel extremely mortal. Then he speaks, or maybe it's just your thoughts catching up. The words arrive without sound. It matters. The song, the care, the presence. You nod like a student who absolutely forgot to read the textbook but wants to pass anyway. Then he smiles, brief, mysterious, with just a hint of, don't forget to water your tomatoes. And they're gone. Not in a puff of smoke. Not with dramatic thunder. Just vanished. The garden is empty again. The frogs resume their karaoke. The torches crackle. A breeze stirs the corn like a whispered exhale. You exhale, too. Maybe they were gods. Maybe just the echoes of belief. Thick in the air after centuries of rituals sung into soil. Either way, it felt real. A group of children pass by, singing together in a spiraling pattern. Each voice entering like a new thread in a braided cord. Their words are simple, repetitive. even, about planting, waiting, growing, the kind of phrases you'd expect in a lullaby. And suddenly it all makes sense. The Aztecs weren't just planting crops. They were raising them, like children. They talked to them, sang to them, watched their moods, celebrated their growth, grieved their loss. These weren't just calories, they were kin. You stand, knees still a little shaky from divine proximity. You brush dirt from your palms and give the nearest corn stalk a respectful nod. It says nothing, of course. But maybe it feels something. You do. There's a strange comfort in all of it. In knowing that long before fertilizer bags and irrigation systems and LED grow lights, people were out here whispering poems to pumpkins and arguing over whether chili liked lullabies. And somehow, it worked. You keep walking, though now with a bit more reverence. It's hard to shake the feeling that the corn might start critiquing your posture. Ahead, a soft melody floats through the air, one lone voice, rising and dipping like a boat on gentle waves. You follow it, your sandals squelching in the moist earth, and find a young man crouched beside a plot of maize. He's not just singing to the corn. He's serenading it, like it's the prettiest girl at the festival and he's hoping for a dance. His song isn't grand, it's soft, sincere, a bit repetitive, like he's saying the same few phrases over and over to make sure the corn really gets it. You catch a few words: growth, moon, offering, beauty. You want to roll your eyes, but you can't. Because the corn actually looks perkier in his row. Maybe it's coincidence, or maybe he just has charisma. But you start to understand. This is how you flirt with a cob. With gentle song, rhythmic breath, and the total conviction that the plant is listening and judging your performance. You kneel beside a clump of squash and attempt your own whispery hum. It comes out sounding like someone sat on a clarinet. You clear your throat and try again. Better. Still not winning any Grammys. But at least this time the squash doesn't recoil. To the Aztecs, this wasn't weird. This was normal. They believed the maize, and the earth itself, responded to sound. Not just sound as pressure waves, but sound as energy. Words were powerful. Spoken blessings nourished the crop's spirit. An angry shout might poison it. And if you sang while planting, you were binding the seed to your intent. Modern studies on plant acoustics are still catching up. Some researchers think low-frequency vibrations might stimulate root growth. Others argue plants can hear only in a loose, metaphorical sense, detecting air pressure changes. Maybe, but not exactly vibing to your Spotify playlist. Still, the idea isn't so far-fetched anymore. The Aztecs were just early adopters. You spot another gardener, this one older, with streaks of gray in his hair and dirt under every fingernail. He's drawing something in the soil with a stick, a swirling spiral with dots and curves. A calendar? A diagram? A doodle? You ask. Planting rhythm, he says. Each day has its song. Turns out, the Aztecs believed every day had its own energy signature. Some days were good for planting maize. Others were better for beans or squash or just staying home and not offending a jealous sky god. And these days each had songs. Specific melodies or rhythms designed to harmonize with the day's spirit. So when you planted on, say, 1 deer or 5 rabbit, you had a playlist. And no, it didn't involve streaming, unless you count water channels through the chinampas. You try to imagine your gardening app sending you daily chant notifications. Good morning. It's too wind, time to sing to your zucchini. Feels like something you'd mute after 2 days. The Aztecs, though, they committed. Nearby, a boy stumbles while planting a small bean. His mother clicks her tongue and gently pulls him back, correcting his posture and murmuring something over the seed. A lullaby? A charm? A warning? Hard to say. But the child listens, replants, whispers his own tiny verse. You realize, this is how you learn. Not through lectures, through repetition, through melody, through generational echo. Singing to the plants wasn't just about the plants, it was how children learned the calendar. The gods, the soil, the stories. You don't forget a fact when you've sung it since you were old enough to stand barefoot in the mud. You pause beside a bushy patch of chili peppers and remember what the bird dancer told you earlier, about not mixing up plant songs. It suddenly seems obvious. Of course you wouldn't sing the same song to a sweet, yielding squash as you would to a spicy little firecracker like a chili. That would be like reciting a love poem to someone's tax accountant. Each plant had its own preferences and moods. And, apparently, social boundaries. The songs weren't just poetic, they were practical. Customized. Farmers knew which melodies pleased which crops. They adjusted their pitch, rhythm, even lyrics based on season, weather, and the plant's response. You hum gently to a chili plant just to see what happens. It does not burst into flames or slap you with a leaf. So that's progress. Still, you make a mental note. Learn the chili's actual song before trying again. No one wants to be pepper cancelled. Historians still debate how structured these songs really were. Some think they followed strict ceremonial codes with specific syllables, drums, and hand gestures. Others believe they were more fluid, improvised chants guided by memory, weather, and intuition. The truth is likely somewhere in between. Rigid enough to preserve meaning, loose enough to stay alive. You hear a bell chime in the distance, one sharp note. A signal. The gardeners begin to gather in the center of the chinampa, where a wide space has been cleared. You follow. Curious. A young girl places a small bowl of cacao at the center of a circle etched into the dirt. Others add offerings, flowers, feathers, bits of cornmeal, polished stones. Then they begin to sing. This isn't farming anymore. This is theater. Not for an audience, but for the land itself. The song builds slowly. A low chant, each voice rising in time with the others. No one leads. No one commands. It's like the song was always there, waiting to be remembered. The melody loops and deepens, echoing off the water. It wraps around you, and you feel like a kernel of corn yourself, tucked in soil, surrounded by heat and promise. You don't know the words, but your body starts to sway anyway. And for a moment, you understand. This is how you speak to the world. This is how you say thank you. This is how you keep the corn sweet and the sky generous. Not with shouts, not with commands, but with song. You hum, just a little, just enough to say, I'm here, too. You've been humming to plants so long. You're half convinced you'll start photosynthesizing any moment now. But there's more to this world than melodies and moonlight. You take a turn down another path, this one darker, quieter, edges softened by fog, and step right into the technical heart of it all. Canoes float gently between the garden rows, gliding like ghosts across the glassy water. Each one is long, slim, hand-carved. You watch as two men paddle slowly, not with urgency, but with that deep, internal rhythm all Aztec labor seems to have. The kind of movement that's more ritual than transport. These aren't just boats. These are lifelines. In the chinampa system, canoes are everything. Your shovel, your wheelbarrow, your pickup truck, your mobile altar for the occasional floating prayer stop. A canoe approaches the bank, and a woman hops out barefoot, her skirt soaked halfway to the knees. She carries a basket full of something dark, wet, and lumpy. She tips it gently onto the soil at the edge of the chinampa. You lean closer and recognize the texture, mud. But not just any mud. This is lakebed sludge, rich with fish bits, rotting weeds, old nutrients, and probably 1,000 microscopic things you'd rather not examine too closely before dinner. Welcome to compost Aztec style. Nothing went to waste. Lake scum? Fertilizer? Duck droppings? Jackpot. Discarded tortilla? Future cucumber. This isn't your standard garden with a Pinterest compost bin and that one neighbor who won't stop bragging about his worm colony. This is large-scale agricultural alchemy, where canals carry not just boats but nutrients, cool air, and whispered blessings between floating garden rafts. You crouch and run your fingers through the soil. It's spongy, warm, it smells like life, not the sterile scent of bagged topsoil, but real, squishy, fragrant fertility. You immediately get it. Why everything grows so well here. The chinampa is a living sponge, a breathing cradle. It's floating, yes, but also anchored by wooden stakes driven deep into the lakebed. Stability wrapped in fluidity, like a trust fall into nature's arms. One gardener paddles up beside you and nods toward your muddy hands. Good earth, he says simply. You agree, not because you know, but because it seems like the kind of thing that deserves agreement. He reaches behind him and pulls out a bundle of something wrapped in reeds. Inside? Ash, finely ground charcoal. He scatters it along the row like seasoning, humming softly. You ask, why ash? To balance, he replies. Too wet, too sweet, too soft. Ash gives the earth memory. You blink. You're not sure what that means. But it sounds good. like something you'd embroider on a pillow for the world's most poetic farmer. The Aztecs didn't just chant and compost. They engineered. The chinampas weren't random garden patches, they were carefully layered, managed, and maintained. Mud and weeds and reeds and mud again. Built up over time like a lasagna made of determination and old leaves. Each one roughly 30 meters long and 2 to 3 meters wide. With channels between wide enough to paddle a canoe, but narrow enough to toss a chili at your neighbor if they're being loud. But none of this worked without precision. The water level had to be managed constantly. Too high, and the roots would drown. Too low, and the floating system turned into a baking tray under the sun. Gardeners used sluices and weirs, primitive water gates, to maintain flow. They were farmers, yes, but also hydrologists, engineers, and, let's be honest, a little bit of sorcerers. You follow one of the water channels and notice it splits into a fork with one side deeper and faster. The gardener beside you points to it. That's for the warm seasons, he says, to cool the root beds. It's elegant, smart, and done without blueprints or permits or heated arguments in hardware store parking lots. Back in the central chinampa, someone lights a bundle of copal incense. The smoke twists upward, pale and fragrant, curling into a lazy spiral before vanishing into the night. It carries with it the scent of pine and citrus and a little bit of mystery. You watch as gardeners stop for a moment, not because they're done, but because the air now belongs to something else. A spirit, a pause, a breath between labors. You sit again, near the edge of one floating bed, and glance at the tools scattered nearby. No iron rakes, no gas-powered anything, just simple digging sticks, woven baskets, and a few obsidian blades sharp enough to make your knuckles flinch. And yet, the result? More productive per square meter than almost any European farm at the time. Historians still argue how many people this system fed. Some estimate hundreds of thousands in Tenochtitlan alone. Others say that's conservative, pointing to chinampa zones stretching far beyond the capital. Regardless, one thing is certain, this wasn't just sustainable farming. This was thriving, multi-generational, ceremonial agriculture, and you're sitting in the middle of it, covered in sacred mud and wondering if you should take up squash whispering as a hobby. You paddle briefly with a gardener, moving silently through the fog. You pass torch-lit plots, each one whispering its own soft tune of leaves and soil and steam. The lake reflects the stars. You realize this is a mirror, not just of the sky, but of belief, intention, and everything humans do when they think no one is watching. But the corn is always watching. You chuckle to yourself. Probably. The fog wraps around your ankles like a sleepy cat as you climb from the canoe and step back onto the soft edge of another chinampa. It feels warmer here, not in temperature, but in energy, as if this patch of earth is holding its breath, waiting for something, or someone. You pass a group of gardeners crouched in a perfect row, weeding slowly and silently. Their movements are synchronized, like an odd sort of dance routine that's been rehearsed for centuries. Each yank of a weed is followed by a murmur. Not annoyance, not grumbling, but something closer to an apology. You step closer and realize they're talking to the weeds. One woman gently removes a creeping vine from around a cornstalk and whispers, "Forgive me, you're strong, but not today." Then she lays the vine down carefully, roots still intact, on a pile beside her. You glance at another gardener, pulling up something leafy and particularly clingy. He hums, pats the soil where it grew, and moves on. At first, it's hard to wrap your head around. Pulling weeds isn't usually a moral dilemma. You're used to scorched earth herbicide commercials and rubber-gloved fury. But here, even the unwanted plants are treated like living beings with histories and maybe even feelings. Because in the Aztec worldview, they are. Nothing is random, nothing is neutral. The plants that grow are part of the same sacred system as the ones you plant. So removing them isn't an act of domination, it's negotiation. You're not ripping out intruders. You're persuading them to step aside. Historians still discuss how deeply this spiritual botany extended. Some argue it was mostly symbolic, a ritualized way to respect the work. Others suggest there were real taboos and beliefs about upsetting the natural balance. Certain plants, it was said, could bring misfortune if pulled on the wrong day or handled too roughly. Others might attract the wrath of Tlaloc if disrespected. And let's not forget Tlaloc. You turn toward the distant thunderheads over the mountains. He's out there somewhere, the rain god with goggle eyes and jaguar teeth, hoarding the storm clouds and deciding which valley gets a sprinkle and which one gets washed into next Tuesday. Here in the gardens, Talak is always lurking, not in a scary way, well, maybe a little, but mostly as a presence. A reminder. Too many weeds, and he sees neglect. Too few, and he wonders what you're hiding. Balance is everything. You pause near a small shrine nestled between a bed of chilies and some wildly ambitious amaranth. It's made of stone, about the size of a shoebox, and decorated with blue tiles, maize husks, and 3 small frogs carved from clay. One of the gardeners notices your gaze. It's for the helpers, she says. The frogs? You ask. She nods. They sing when the rain comes. They know before we do. You take a step back and listen. Sure enough, somewhere in the distance, a frog is letting loose the kind of song you'd expect after 2 shots of fermented cactus juice. Not pretty, but definitely enthusiastic. The gardener smiles. The weeds know, too. Some only appear when water is near. You glance at the pile of discarded vines. They're not trashed. They're carefully stacked, even arranged, like a bouquet of things no longer needed, but still respected. Some of the vines have been tied into knots or woven into little spirals. Ritual gestures, maybe, or possibly just Aztec art therapy. Further down the chinampa, a young boy is talking to a dandelion with alarming intensity. You can't hear the words, but the tone is serious, like a breakup speech. Eventually, he sighs, plucks it gently, and places it into a small pouch. That pouch, you later learn, is for returning the removed plants to the lake. Not dumping, returning. At the end of the day, these plants will be paddled out into open water and released, returned to the mother lake that birthed them. Not because they were useless, but because their time in this plot is done. You start to see weeds differently. Not as villains, but as wanderers, overstepping their welcome. Maybe, but not evil. Just opportunistic. You kneel beside a clump of clover and hesitate. You whisper, I need this space. Please grow somewhere else. Then you pull gently, feeling the root give way with a soft pop. No drama, no lightning, just a respectful pause. The soil seems to exhale. Maybe it's your imagination. Maybe it's not. You pass a small hut where a woman is making a tea out of one of the weeds you just saw removed. Turns out, a lot of what gets pulled from the garden isn't tossed, it's used. For medicine, for dye, for snacks, because even sacred agriculture needs snacking. She hands you a cup. It smells like pepper and dirt and something faintly minty. You sip. It's earthy and somehow calming. The idea settles deep in your chest. This isn't a war against weeds. This is a conversation. A garden is a negotiation between the plants you choose and the ones that volunteer. Between the song you sing and the silence of the soil. Historians still argue whether these rituals were purely spiritual or served a more social function, training people to be meticulous, careful, respectful, but you don't need a degree to see what's happening here. This is care, not just for crops, but for everything that grows, even if it grows in the wrong place. You walk on, basket now slightly heavier with wild herbs and second thoughts. The gardeners behind you continue their gentle work, singing under their breath, weaving respect into every pluck and pull. Even the weeds seem to leave with dignity. The sky has deepened to that velvety blue just before true night. When the stars step forward shyly and everything hushes itself for no reason it can name. You've left behind the weeding and the whispered apologies. And now you find yourself in a wide clearing surrounded by flowering plants that glint silver under the moonlight. Everything feels suspended, like the garden is waiting for a cue from something celestial. A low chant begins again. Farther off this time, you follow it instinctively, stepping carefully across stepping stones slick with mist. As you near the sound, you spot the chanter, a young woman standing in a circle of crushed flower petals. Arms outstretched, face tilted toward the sky. She's wearing a cloak of woven reeds, embroidered with lightning bolt patterns and tiny bells that tremble with each breath she takes. This is no ordinary gardener. You've stumbled into the territory of celestial micromanagement. The Aztecs didn't just sing to their crops, they sang with the sky. Agriculture wasn't a local job. It was cosmically outsourced. The stars, the sun, the moon, And especially the planet Venus were not just passive decorations, they were overseers, supervisors, timers. Everything from planting to harvest was tracked using the movements of celestial bodies. You didn't just sow corn when you felt like it. You waited until the stars nodded in approval. You don't want to tick off Venus. She's beautiful, yes, but also famously touchy about scheduling. Tonight is one of those nights. You can feel it in the way the frogs are quieter, and the crickets sink their chirping like a metronome. The air has a rhythm, and the woman is part of it. She's singing something that sounds like a lullaby to the stars. And then you see it. Low on the horizon, bright and pulsing like an eye-opening, Venus. You blink. It's clearer than any star. Bold and alone in the east. And just like that, you realize why everyone here is slightly more careful than usual tonight. This is a night of Tezcatlipoca, the mirror field, a special date on the Aztec calendar where Venus's appearance marked a moment of divine inspection. You whisper, "What happens now?" The woman doesn't answer, but a man nearby does. He's crouched beside a mound of beans, his hands dusted with ash and cacao powder. "Now," he says, "we ask permission again. From the corn?" "No," he says softly. "From everything else." During specific celestial alignments, especially those involving Venus or lunar phases, the Aztecs performed midnight rituals not just for blessings, but to maintain balance. These were moments when the boundaries between the worlds were soft. The gods listened more closely. The plants felt more. The wrong word, the wrong gesture? That could tip the balance from bounty to blight. He points to a basket filled with obsidian dust, shimmering black powder that looks like crushed stars. He tosses a pinch of it into the air, where it catches the moonlight and falls like slow, dark snow onto the beans. You watch in silence. Then he begins to chant. The words aren't sharp or loud. They're almost mumbled, like the kind of promises you make to the dark just before sleep. He thanks the wind. He names the direction. He invokes the name of a mountain you've never heard and probably can't pronounce. It doesn't feel showy. It feels intimate. This is how you manage your crops when you believe the sky is watching. You check your attitude. You pick your words. You remember your place in the story, not the hero, not the victim, just a thread in the tapestry. Venus climbs higher. The moon shifts behind a cloud, turning the whole chinampa into a dim shadow theater. You hear movement in the bushes. Something rustling, not alarming. Just a reminder that you're not alone. You never were. You sit beside a fireless hearth. A ring of stones filled with cold ashes. A small bowl rests nearby, filled with water and floating marigold petals. You peer in and see your reflection, distorted slightly by the petals. Then, beside your face, the moon's. This, too, is a kind of micromanagement, a celestial review, a visual checklist. Are you respectful? Are you ready? Are you awake? You lie back in the grass, ignoring the damp seeping into your clothes. Above you, stars prick the sky like 1,000 tiny reminders that you're very small. But not forgotten. Historians still puzzle over how deeply the Aztecs linked astronomy to agriculture. Some argue they were among the most sophisticated skywatchers in the ancient world. Others say their charts were poetic, not precise, but no one denies the devotion. The moon was a calendar. Venus was a judge, and every time the stars aligned, the songs changed slightly, an update from the heavens. You hear another chant begin, softer now, sung by a group of children. They're forming a circle, holding gourds filled with pebbles and shaking them in rhythm. You watch as they dance in slow, looping steps, mirroring the curve of a constellation above. None of them look confused. This knowledge is old, inherited, and lived. One of them sees you and tosses you a small stone. You catch it clumsily. It's etched with a symbol you don't recognize, something between a spiral and a seed. The child smiles and returns to the dance. You sit quietly, stone in hand, listening to the corn rustling in the background, to the frogs singing their nervous little verses, to the moon, hanging low and full, humming something only the leaves can understand. Tonight, you realize, isn't about farming, it's about humility, about learning your role in the system. You're not in charge here. You're part of the choreography. And your only job is to move in time with the stars. Sing your notes softly, and not trip over your own arrogance. You lie back once more and hum. Just a little, just enough for the sky to hear. You wake with a start, not from sleep, But from that dazed state where your body forgets it has responsibilities and your mind decides it's fine floating among stars and squash. The chinampa around you remains unchanged, soft earth, shimmering leaves, distant drums, but now, you sense a shift in the kind of people moving through it. They look familiar, sort of. These aren't the feather-draped gardeners or moon chasers you met earlier. These folks walk slower, speak less, and carry themselves like people who've just come from somewhere important. Their robes are simpler, their jewelry minimal, but their presence is loud in the way only the quietest people manage. One carries a bundle of white flowers. Another holds a basket of polished stones and cornmeal. And the one leading them, her cloak embroidered with serpents and stalks, holds nothing but a small obsidian blade. You are now in the company of agricultural priests. You step back instinctively, unsure if you're allowed here. One of them notices your hesitation and offers a faint nod. Not exactly an invitation, but also not a warning to leave. So you stay, quietly. They gather in a loose circle beside a tall stalk of maize. It's older than the others. Its tassels droop with age. Its husks have begun to dry and curl like paper. And at its base is a small altar built of smooth stones. Flower petals, and what looks like the remains of old offerings, ashes. Bits of charred wood, seeds pressed flat by time. The priestess kneels. She doesn't speak. Instead, she sings, a single, trembling line that wavers between grief and celebration. The others join in, low voices. Some male, some female, some undecided, all woven into a tone that feels older than the chinampas themselves. This isn't a performance, it's a conversation. You recognize the cadence, even if not the words. They're honoring the end of a cycle. The dying plant, the spirit of the maize, which, in the Aztec world, was never just food. It was a being, a companion, a sacrifice itself. That's something modern minds struggle with. We're used to the idea of giving sacrifices. But the Aztecs believed the maize sacrificed itself for humanity. It grew, bloomed, fed them, and then bowed out. What you owed in return wasn't just harvesting, it was acknowledgement. Ceremony. A promise to continue the cycle. This ceremony isn't about mourning. It's about balance. You inch closer. No one stops you. The priestess reaches into her cloak and pulls out a small clay figurine shaped like a woman holding a bundle of corn. She places it at the base of the stalk. The singing grows louder, more rhythmic. Then something odd happens. A child, no more than 5, approaches from the side, carrying a cup of what looks like chocolate. Thick, dark, unsweetened, the real ceremonial stuff. He kneels and pours it at the plant's roots, careful not to spill. Then he places one hand over his heart and steps back. You realize, this priesthood isn't made of elites. It's communal. Anyone can step in, if they know the rhythms. If they respect the process. If they sing with meaning. You look around and realize the whole chinampa has subtly joined in. Gardeners hum while hoeing. Children tap gourds in time. Even the frogs, bless their croaky hearts, seem to sing with intent now. Historians still debate how formal the Aztec priesthood was in agriculture. Were these priests appointed by temples? Or were they local community guides with spiritual know-how? Some evidence suggests both. Grand temples held large public ceremonies. Yes, but it was in the chinampas. In the everyday planting and harvesting. Where the spiritual guidance lived. And it wasn't just about rituals. These priests knew soil types, lunar timing, seasonal cues, pest behaviors. They were scientists wrapped in spiritual language. Not in contradiction, but in cooperation. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a bundle of chili pods hanging from his belt, speaks softly to a gardener. The two bend over a wilting plant. Their brows furrowed. The priest touches the soil, pinches a leaf, then whispers something. The gardener nods, thoughtful. It's not, pray harder. It's not, sing louder. It's advice. Technical, spiritual, holistic. You begin to see it. The neighborhood garden club here is a priesthood, not robes and incense and ominous Latin. But songs and seeds and knowing when to leave a plant alone. One woman, older, her hair streaked with white and her eyes bright, walks toward you. She holds out a flower. Not dramatically, just matter of fact. You take it. Then she leans in and says, "The corn listens to you now." You don't know what that means. And you're not sure you want to. She smiles like she knows that too. You clutch the flower. You hum, Softly. Not because it's required, but because it feels right. You're part of this now. Not a guest. Not a ghost. Just a person among plants. Under stars. Breathing the same mist the gods once inhaled. And somehow, that's enough. You wander away from the priest circle quietly, clutching the flower in your hand like a ticket to a dream you're still figuring out. The mist hugs your shoulders now, warm, heavy, but somehow not suffocating. If anything, it feels like the chinampa itself is giving you a approving pat on the back. But the calm doesn't last. Because the next plot you pass, well, let's just say things feel a little off. The corn here is crooked. Not dramatically so, but enough that you notice. Some stalks lean sideways like they're mid-complaint. A few have curled leaves. Almost like they're sulking. You glance around for a gardener. Maybe someone to explain what's going on. And then you see her. A woman, middle-aged, face set in a look that says, "I'm not mad. Just disappointed," is standing with her hands on her hips, staring at a chili bush like it owes her rent money. She mutters under her breath, not chanting, not praying, just scolding. You pause. This feels like eavesdropping on a family argument. She notices you and sighs. "It's this one again," she says, pointing at the chili. Holds a grudge like you wouldn't believe. You blink. "The plant?" She nods. "I stepped on its cousin last spring. It hasn't forgiven me." "Okay, so this is happening." Welcome to section 11. Plants with personal grudges. To the Aztecs, plants weren't passive. They weren't just part of the environment, they had memory, spirit, mood. Some were helpful, cooperative, sweet as squash pie. Others, petty, spiteful, the kind that drop leaves just to make a point. You kneel beside a bean vine that's twisting the wrong way around its pole. "He won't grow properly unless you sing that one song," the woman explains. "The one about Talak's tears. But only if you use the sad version. If you do the hopeful one, he stops altogether." You nod slowly like that makes perfect sense. In a way, it does. You've already accepted that the Aztecs saw plants as listening beings. But this is a step further. This is behavior. These aren't just crops. They're characters. Historians still wrestle with how literally to take this. Was it a symbolic language? A metaphor for careful gardening? Or did the Aztecs genuinely believe that individual plants held grudges, played favorites, and responded differently depending on how you treated them? The woman beside you clearly falls into the "they definitely do" camp. "You ever have a maize stalk just refuse to tassel?" she asks. "Like, not because of water or light, but because you forgot its name day?" You haven't, but now you're nervous about every salad you've ever made. She crouches beside a tomato plant and hums softly. It's not a song, it's more like a memory, whispered into the soil. Then she pats the stem gently. "This one likes stories. Anything with an animal in it." Sure enough, the tomato looks perkier. You don't know how, but it does. You realize this is more than superstition. It's attention. Whether or not the plants actually hold grudges, the gardeners behave as if they do. And the result? Hyper-aware, deeply engaged care. Nothing is overlooked. Every plant gets its due. A few steps away, a young boy is crouching beside a wilted patch of amaranth, holding a feather and gently brushing the leaves. His mother nods approvingly. "Was it sick?" you ask. She shrugs. "Just upset. We moved its friend yesterday." You don't know if she's joking. You don't ask. But it strikes you. This system doesn't just train you to grow crops. It trains you to be mindful, attentive, gentle. You don't yank weeds or pluck leaves with indifference. You ask. You listen. You remember which chili sulks and which squash thrives on compliments. Back near the water's edge, another gardener kneels beside a patch of corn and burns a small braid of sage. The smoke rises in lazy curls. She wouldn't sprout, he says to no one in particular. So we offered her a story. "A story?" you echo. "About her mother," he says, as if that clears it up. You sit down on a damp log and try to make sense of it. In modern terms, we talk about soil pH, moisture levels, sun exposure. And yes, the Aztecs understood those things too, in their own way. But layered on top of that was a framework of narrative, memory, and relationship. Your cucumber isn't just a vegetable. It's a participant in a sacred drama. A moody cast member with its own arc. And you're not the director. You're more like a stage manager. Your job is to keep everyone happy, humming, and hopefully not offended by last week's compost choices. You watch as the chili bush you met earlier finally lifts one leaf. As if grudgingly admitting the apology was acceptable. The woman nods. There, she's better now. You decide not to question how she knows. Instead, you lean down and whisper, I like your leaves. You think you hear a faint rustle in response. Maybe wind, maybe thanks. You hum softly as you walk away. Just in case. You hum as you walk, still thinking about the chili bush with trust issues. When the air around you shifts. It's cooler now, not because the temperature has dropped, but because the wind carries something different, an electric hum. A warning in the grass. The hush of everything bracing for something large. The song of the frogs changes. The breeze grows teeth, and you hear it, a deep drumming. Not human, not planned, the rhythmic kind that comes from the sky itself. You step onto a clearing ringed by stone markers, each carved with crude but powerful faces, wide mouths, flared nostrils, bulging eyes, some smiling, some screaming, all watching, and in the center of it all, a small platform, damp from recent use, scattered with flower petals, maize cobs, and, oddly, frog statues. Lots of them. You've entered Tlaloc's court now. Rain god, mood-swinging king of the clouds, lord of storms, and apparently, passionate frog enthusiast. Tlaloc wasn't just a deity, they say he was a whole weather system with emotions. He could bless your crops with gentle rain or slam your chinampas with floods just because someone sneezed wrong during a chant. Farmers respected him, feared him, tried to butter him up with every flower and frog available. And frogs? Yeah, they were his messengers. When the frogs sang, it meant Tlaloc was near. Or cranky. Or both. Tonight, they're singing in full chorus. And it's not romantic, it's panicked. A group of gardeners gather at the edge of the platform, holding bundles of herbs, bowls of water, and, because Aztecs never skip drama, clay flutes shaped like frogs. They begin to play, a dissonant, eerie sound that somehow mimics the croak of the real thing. The line between animal and instrument blurs, and you feel the garden listen. You glance at the sky. Clouds have gathered, thick, low, and bruised purple. A distant rumble answers the frog flutes. One gardener lifts her voice above the sound, singing a verse that sounds like a lullaby if the baby were a very angry storm. You whisper, is this rain summoning? An older man near you nods. In rain management, turns out, Tlaloc doesn't just require flattery. He demands it, and he doesn't always listen to reason. So the Aztecs developed rain ceremonies both to request water and to negotiate with it. A little rain? Perfect. Too much? Please don't drown us. Oh mighty storm frog dad. You watch the ritual intensify. The gardeners circle the platform, casting handfuls of maize meal into the air. A child approaches with a clay frog painted blue and green, places it gently at the foot of the altar, then bows. Then the dancing begins. Bare feet slap wet earth in a rhythm that isn't quite graceful, but very, very deliberate. Arms lift toward the sky, then fall in sync with the drumming frogs. It's rain's version of, we see you. We like you. Please don't wreck everything. Historians still debate whether these rituals were seasonal, scheduled with the solar calendar, or performed reactively in times of drought or flood. Some claim they were highly organized with priest-led parades, while others suggest families did their own smaller home-based frog offerings. The frogs were definitely real. Frog bones show up in excavation sites near altars and water shrines. The Aztecs saw rain not just as water but as lifeblood. The arrival of the rains marked the beginning of the agricultural season. Without it, famine, chaos, sky-induced sadness. Tlaloc lived in a watery paradise called Tlalocan, lush, green, full of flowers and mist and probably amphibians with unreasonable singing careers. It was a kind of heaven for those who died by drowning or illness. Strange? Maybe, but consistent. Water was the end and the beginning. One woman near the altar begins to sob, not dramatically, but purposefully. Her tears fall into a bowl she's holding. She adds water to it, stirs in maize meal, then offers it to the sky with a chant that translates loosely to, "As we cry, so may the clouds." The first drop of rain lands on your forehead. You look up. Another drop. Then another. Soft, spaced, deliberate. The garden groans in relief. The corn shivers. The frogs modulate into an "I told you so" harmony. You hear someone mutter, "He's in a good mood tonight." You choose not to ask what happens when he's not. The dance continues until the rain strengthens. Still gentle, but confident now, like it's decided this was worth attending. The gardeners don't run. They lift their faces, mouths open, welcoming it. One of them hands you a gourd of water and nods. You sip. It's earthy, rain-chilled, and faintly sweet. Gift from the god, someone says. You whisper back, "Thanks, Talak." A nearby chili plant waves violently in the wind. You decide that was approval. You step away from the ritual platform. Soaked now but strangely content. This wasn't about control. The Aztecs didn't think they controlled the rain. They engaged it, appeased it, made deals with it, and if it rained, it wasn't a success, it was a relationship working. For now, you take one last look at the altar. The frog flute's now silent. The clay frogs damp and glistening. Then you walk away, leaving the sky to its work and the corn to its song. You hum as you go. Quiet, grateful, and maybe a little damp. The rain continues. Not hard, not loud, just a steady whisper on the leaves. You pull your tunic tighter, feet squelching in the soft mud, and follow the glow of firelight ahead. It's different now, less sacred ceremony, more watchful curiosity. You've arrived at the edge of the chinampa where things shift. The air feels heavier, not in a mystical way, but in a very human, very historical way. There are new voices here, sharper consonants, thicker armor. The Spanish have arrived. You duck behind a stand of corn and peer out. A small group of men, unmistakably European in dress and posture, stand at the perimeter of the garden, boots crusted with lake mud. Their faces say, confused. Their hands hover near their weapons, not out of threat, but habit. You've seen this look before. The face of someone who doesn't quite understand what they're witnessing, but suspects it matters more than they're ready for. They're not alone. Aztec scribes and nobles stand beside them, trying, valiantly, to explain. One man gestures dramatically toward the gardens, speaking in quick, confident Nahuatl. Another tries to translate into halting Spanish, but you can already tell it's not going well. The Spaniards keep staring at the corn like it might blink. You edge closer. No one notices. You're not part of this world, not really. One of the Spaniards mutters something about brujeria, witchcraft. Another writes in a journal, sketching a diagram of the chinampas that looks wrong. The rows are too straight, the water too clean, the maize drawn like sad featherless chickens. You sigh. What you're watching is more than cultural confusion. It's a misreading of a civilization. The Spaniards saw gardens, yes, but not the meaning behind them. Not the songs, not the frogs, just dirt and plants, productivity, something to be measured and, eventually, taxed. One man bends to examine the soil, rubs it between his fingers, and grunts in satisfaction. He clearly sees value here, but not magic, not prayer, just fertile land, a resource. And the songs? Well, those get written down, sometimes, translated poorly, described with words like chanting, or superstition, or occasionally, madness. You watch as one of the Spanish soldiers points at a gardener who's mid-song, clearly serenading his squash like it's a long-lost lover. The soldier tilts his head. He doesn't mock, but his expression says it all, quaint, like he's watching a child pretend to cook in a toy kitchen. The gardener keeps singing. He doesn't stop, doesn't flinch, doesn't lower his voice. He knows who the song is for. And it's not the foreigners. Historians still argue about what the Spanish really thought of these practices. Some accounts suggest they were baffled, others that they feared it. Anything involving ritual and rhythm and indigenous languages sent up red flags in their Catholic brains. More than a few friars wrote warnings about pagan farming ceremonies, describing them as distractions from salvation. Of course, they didn't stop eating the maize. You pass a stone marker. Its glyphs chiseled in a spiral. Someone has tried to deface it, carved a crude cross over the symbols. It doesn't cover the original entirely, just interrupts it. That's how it was. Not always a full erasure. Sometimes just noise laid over song. Still, the gardeners keep working. One young woman glances at the group of Spaniards and sings louder. Not defiantly, not angrily, just firmly, like she refuses to pretend her squash can't hear her just because someone else doesn't get it. You sit nearby, watching. This is the quiet resistance no one writes poems about. Not swords. Not rebellions. Just people continuing to speak their language to the land. To keep singing. To keep believing that the corn remembers their voices. Even if the invaders don't. One scribe nearby scribbles something in his notes. You catch a glimpse. Locals sing to plants nightly. Belief in plant spirit. Refuse to cease despite warnings. He pauses. Then adds. Plants seem to thrive unnaturally. Soil quality excellent. Possibly worth further study. You almost laugh. He doesn't get it. Not really. But the observation stands. The gardens grow. The corn listens. And the people still sing. You rise. Stretch. And move on. Leaving behind the awkward history lesson. As you walk, you think about all the ways belief persists. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums. Sometimes it kneels in the rain and whispers to beans. And sometimes it sings just loud enough to drown out a language that tried to rewrite it. The frogs resume their chorus. The drizzle softens. The firelight fades behind you. And the corn? Still listening. The sky begins to clear as you wander away from the confused Spaniards and their reluctant notebooks. The rain has tapered off to the occasional drip from overgrown leaves. And the fog begins to retreat like a shy guest who overstayed its welcome. You stretch your back, crack your knuckles, and realize you're still humming. Not a full song, just a phrase, something simple and repetitive that loops without effort. It's catchy in the way all ancient things are, soothing, circular, impossible to shake. You pass another garden bed, this one less sacred altar. More experimental chaos. Someone's planted rows of maize alongside beans and chili. But in odd arrangements, spirals, checkerboards, squiggles. There's even a lone avocado tree in the corner looking slightly offended at its isolation. Sitting nearby is a young man wearing a tunic and chewing thoughtfully on a piece of sugarcane. He's surrounded by gourds tied with string, some shells, and, of all things, a flat slab of rock covered in carved dots and lines. It looks suspiciously like a musical score had a baby with a map. He sees you looking and grins. Trying something new, he says, mixing rhythms, different plants, different songs, seeing who gets along. You blink. Like, musical experiments? He nods. My uncle says corn likes the deep chants. But my cousin swears if you whisper falsetto, it grows sweeter. You sit beside him. He strikes one of the gourds. Then taps the shell. The sound is uneven, percussive, irregular. Then he hums a bit. Not a sacred chant. More like a nursery rhyme that got lost in a thunderstorm. He nods toward a group of maize plants nearby. They lean more when I do this, he says, tapping the gourd again. See? You squint. The plants are leaning slightly, but toward the light. Or toward the sound? You can't tell. You really think they're listening? He shrugs. Maybe. Or maybe I just pay better attention when I'm singing. And there it is. Even now, modern scientists wrestle with this. Some plant biologists believe acoustic vibration affects plant growth. Others scoff. Controlled experiments are tricky. And peer-reviewed journals don't tend to publish papers titled, "Corn seems sad when you're rude." But outside the labs, gardeners everywhere keep talking to their plants. Some play Mozart. Others swear by talk radio. And here you are, in the floating gardens of Tenochtitlan, watching a young man compose songs for beans like he's got a Grammy deadline. You ask, what happens if you sing the wrong thing? He grins. Then the squash gets jealous. He's only half joking. In the distance, you hear something unexpected. A stringed instrument, not ancient, but recent. Somewhere, someone is plucking a guitar and singing. You follow the sound and find a girl in modern clothes, hoodie, sandals, earbuds dangling from one side. She sits cross-legged beside a patch of marigolds, softly singing in Spanish, her voice drifting in and out of key. The plants around her are blooming brilliantly. What's the song, you ask? She glances up. An old lullaby. My abuela used to sing it while planting. I thought it was silly when I was little. Now, I'm not so sure. You watch the marigolds sway. Turns out, you don't need feathers or obsidian dust or frog flutes. You just need attention, rhythm, care. The tradition didn't disappear. It morphed. Old songs become new songs. Sacred chants become Spotify playlists for succulents. And corn? Corn keeps listening. You start thinking about your own plants, your dusty spider plant, your tragic attempt at balcony herbs, the basil that gave up after 2 weeks of emotional neglect. Maybe they weren't hopeless. Maybe they were just waiting for their verse. Historians still argue whether the singing made a physical difference. Was it the frequency, the air movement, the care, or was it just a form of ritualized mindfulness that happened to result in better gardening? Theories abound, but here's what we know. The Aztecs believed it worked. And belief, when paired with consistent attention and careful technique, tends to grow things. Back near the patchwork garden, the young man hums again. His plants rustle softly, like they're considering his melody. You stand and stretch. The night air smells less like rain now, more like earth and green things and maybe the faintest hint of cocoa. Keep singing, you say to the plants. They don't answer, but they don't not answer either. You've looped back now, to the part of the chinampas where everything feels like the end of a story, still alive. Still growing, but quieter somehow. Less urgency. The songs here are barely whispers. The kind of melodies that drift like pollen and dissolve before you can even decide how you feel about them. The moon is higher now. And for the first time, you notice how bright it is. Not harsh, just present, watching, not judging. You wander toward a smaller, more isolated plot, a chinampa tucked between two wide canals, almost hidden by tall reeds. There's only one gardener here, an old man, bent, barefoot, and humming something so faint you feel it before you hear it. He doesn't look up as you approach, just keeps moving down the row, brushing his hands along the leaves like he's checking for memories. You don't speak. Eventually, he does. "She was my wife's," he says, gesturing to a patch of maize. "Planted it for years. Knew each stalk like a child." You nod, quietly. "After she passed," he adds, "I couldn't hear the song right. Forgot the rhythms." A pause. "Then one night, I stopped trying. I just hummed what I remembered. And the corn listened again." You don't ask whether he believes the corn is sentient. That's not the point. You know what he means. It's about remembering. About singing even when the words are broken. About planting something because you hope, not because you're certain. Around you, the chinampa sways with life. The frogs resume their gentle grumble. A dragonfly buzzes by, low and slow, like a tiny propeller-powered prayer. And you realize, this isn't a story about farming. It's about staying connected, in a world that forgets so quickly. The Aztecs made a habit of remembering, through song, through rhythm, through ritual, even when they were invaded, overridden, redrawn on maps and rewritten in books. They sang, and their children sang. And now, maybe, the gardens still remember the melodies whispered into their roots. You step forward, kneel beside the old man, and place your hand gently on the soil. It's warm, alive, forgiving. You hum, not a perfect tune, but your own. And maybe, just maybe, the corn leans closer to hear. The chinampa fades behind you now. Slowly, like a dream dissolving in morning light. The reeds blur into the water. The songs soften into silence. And the torchlight flickers once more, then goes out completely. You're not walking anymore, just floating, between thought and sleep, between history and now. The frogs still murmur in the distance, but even they sound like they're dozing off mid-sentence. The stars above Tenochtitlan blink like sleepy eyes. The water laps gently against the chinampa edges. A soft, lazy applause for all the singing and planting and forgiving that came before. You lie back on the soil. It welcomes you, not like a bed, but like a memory, a place that holds you without needing to understand you. The moon bathes everything in its quiet light, and somewhere, far off, another gardener begins a lullaby. Maybe for the corn, maybe for you. You close your eyes. The song drifts into your bones. The corn listens, and all of it, every leaf, every root, every note, settles into stillness. You are part of the garden now, part of the song. And everything is exactly where it should be.